Welcome to Pixel Perfect Wellness, where we explore the exciting intersection of gaming and wellness. I'm your host, EMUHLEET, a nurse with a passion for health and also a professional gamer. You might be wondering, how does gaming and wellness come together? Well, what we're here to discover. As someone who spends hours in front of a screen, I've experienced firsthand the impact of gaming that it can have on our physical and mental well-being. This episode is brought to you by ThunderPick. ThunderPick is an innovative crypto esports betting site and online casino designed to meet the expectations of the fast-growing community of gamers and esports enthusiasts. Visit thunderpick.io today to place your bet on one of your favorite teams. Let's get into it. Hi everybody, welcome back to episode 2 of Pixel Perfect in Wellness. My name is EMUHLEET and I'm your host, and today I'm super excited about our chat that I'm going to be having, and I'll introduce our guest because we're going to be talking about nutrition. And you guys know I've been posting about nutrition hardcore on my social media for the last 2 years with my struggles that I've been going through, so I'm very excited for this chat because I think it's going to be very informative and help a lot of you. So I'd like to introduce you guys to my guest, which is a performance dietitian and director of Nutrition 1HP, Casey Thomas. Hi, Casey.
Hi. Yeah, I'm super excited to be here, and I do love talking about nutrition. So absolutely really excited for this call, and hopefully we can talk about some strategies that can help out some gamers.
Me too. I think it's going to be really good. So in this episode right now, we're going to offer some insights of the role of nutrition that it has in the gaming performance. I'm a professional esports athlete, so I know that nutrition definitely needs to be talked about your performance and handling all of that. And we're also just going to be talking about some ideas for quick snacks that you guys might have during long gaming days, especially in tournaments, and also talk about Casey's role in 1HP. So, Casey, could you give us a little bit of a background and what's your expertise? And I'm also curious, how did you get into the gaming world?
Yeah. So my background's kind of interesting, and I took a little bit of a circuitous route to become a dietitian. But food was something that always interested me as a child, or maybe not as a child, but maybe like come late middle school, early high school.
Oh.
And I had a bunch of friends who were interested in all sorts of like really costly endeavors and hobbies that I couldn't afford to do at the same time. I had like a car buddy, I had like a computer buddy, I had like I'm just going to say like a nerd buddy who had access to like a chemistry lab and all this kind of stuff. And I couldn't afford any of that to partake in any of that. And we were all kind of like collectively just like reading scientific literature and so on. And for me, I could read nutrition and test it out on myself. And it was a fun little thing that I could do with a very low cost barrier to entry kind of thing. And so I just had a lot of fun testing out pretty much every single supplement and diet that I could get my hands on, really. And it got to the point where I would keep these like mini journals. I have them on like a bookshelf, and I would keep tabs on like all of like my mood, my workout, my sleep, my gut symptoms, my just energy levels, like all this kind of stuff. I would get blood work before and after too, and my doctors actually hated me for it because it'd be like several times a year I'd come in, and there was actually one diet that messed up my blood for like 6 months, which was pretty awful. Oh, and I knew it was going to be bad walking in. But I had no formal training at that point. Like that was just me doing that on the side. I played games most of my life, albeit at, very poor kind of level, nothing to your caliber. And my parents had aspirations for me to be a doctor. And so I was pre-med. I was really fascinated by the brain. So I was actually a neurobiology undergraduate. And my parents were like, oh, well, that means you can be a brain surgeon. And I was like, okay, well, I was like, this is crazy. And so I actually started shadowing some doctors, and no disrespect to doctors, but I mean, I just was like, this is not for me. I really do not want to do this.
Yeah.
And so what I actually did was I went to go work in clinical research, which, as you know, I was very fascinated by research, and specifically where we're looking at various pharmaceuticals and supplement compounds and their impacts on the brain in both the clinical and non-clinical population. So I got to work with, like schizophrenia, ADHD, bipolar, depression, like all these kind of people. And then we also got to work with like normal, healthy individuals. And about this time, I started getting approached by some high-level athletes, traditional athletes, who were interested in what's the next big thing that I can take that's not going to have me pop on a drug test, just speaking candidly. And
Sure.
what you see is actually, I'm probably dating myself here a little bit, but what you see in the medical literature is that the medical literature predates the performance enhancing supplements by maybe 10 or 20 years or so. And so like all of the work that was being done for kidney issues with EPO and all this kind of stuff eventually turned into like Lance Armstrong. And so that whole thing happened. And so I had some savvy people who were approaching me and were like, yo, what can I take? In traditional sports, what you see is that the obvious stuff is banned, like steroids are banned. But as far as cognitive boosters, cognitive strategies, that's a gray area and essentially gets a free pass. So that started happening. I was really interested. I went back to school to become a dietitian. And then I guess maybe I'm talking a little too much, but to speed it along, I went to go work in the traditional sports realm. I was the performance dietitian leading up the program at UCLA Athletics. After that, I started to focus a little bit more on private practice work. And nowadays I've worked with a lot of professional teams, a lot of high-level high school athletes, collegiate athletes. I've worked with like gold medaling Olympians. And so my route is initially in traditional sports. However, when I was working at UCLA and my undergrad was UCI, both of them had really stellar esports programs. And so I was already kind of friends with them.
I love them.
Yeah, UCI is phenomenal. And so I was really close with both of them. And just because I was playing games, I was familiar with their esports, scenes. And what I started doing when I became a dietitian was like, hey, do you guys just want me to come do like a team talk for you guys and like come talk to the players and see what I can do to help them out? And so I was helping them out pretty regularly while I was still doing the traditional sports thing. And then, I was having kind of like a little niche for myself in traditional sports where I was leveraging nutrition and supplement strategies to enhance cognitive performance. So it was like shooting accuracy and basketball, or like hand-eye coordination and baseball, or these kind of things. And they were like, hey, can you do that for us in esports? And I was like, you're right, actually you can do that exact same thing. And so anyway, so 1HP approached me and they wanted me to come and support their, they didn't have anyone managing nutrition. And so they brought me into the fold to manage essentially the nutrition program. And so with 1HP, I've worked with a lot of professional teams that we've been contracted with. I mean, there's a lot at this point, but I've been in the esports scene for about 5 years. More than that now, actually, at least at like the professional level. And even like my published scientific paper was with professional League of Legends teams, which doesn't exist anymore, but some people might know Echo Fox back in the day. That was actually owned by Rick Fox, and I got to meet him and hang out with him, which was really cool.
How cool.
Yeah, so he's a legend.
He's so nice.
Yeah. But anyway, so today I help and I work with 1HP. I still do some private practice work with some other people. I teach at Cal State LA. I teach at UCLA. I do scientific peer review for scientific journals. And I game in my spare time, I suppose.
What spare time do you have?
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot of time. I got 2 dogs. I got a wife and a baby on the way and all this stuff. So, it's exciting. So yeah, not a whole lot of time, admittedly, but I get to do what I enjoy. So it's nice.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you have your hands in a lot of everything, which is kind of similar to me. And finding spare time to do anything is rare, but it seems like you're passionate and you love what you do. So that's great, Yeah. You were talking a little bit about traditional sports, and this is something that I really want gamers to realize. A lot of the studies in traditional sports is so relative to esports, especially us as athletes. My team, when I was on Dignitas, we did training with the Philadelphia 76ers, and we got firsthand to see some of the training with the nutritionist. Was my first time. And nice. She was the one that was telling us, like, I don't care that you're gamers. You still have to eat, blah, 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 blah. And so it's important, and that's something that I wanted to ask you about. How do you think nutrition can contribute to our cognitive function, and why is it crucial for gamers, especially for our performance?
Yeah, and it's a great question. And I usually when I'm working with an esports team, I allocate like at first just intro session. That's like, I guess I'll call it like the why should you care presentation, because a lot of people don't care about nutrition.
Yeah.
And it's kind of heartbreaking to me actually. But I mean, there's a multitude of reasons, and nutrition practices for the explicit purpose of cognitive enhancement goes back literally like thousands of years. Like if you go look at like ancient Greek scholars and things like that, like the students of these like philosophers and so on, there was like a practice to, for example, wear like garlands of rosemary, and they believed that that would help with memory. And it's not until today that we actually have the scientific data to show that actually it did, and it does help with memory and those kind of things. So this idea of like specialized diets for specific, performance improvement has been known. Literally, like you can find references to like randomized control trials, like in the Bible, in like gladiators, and like all this kind of stuff where they're testing out dietary protocols for a specific purpose. And esports is on potentially one side of the spectrum of like this physical cognitive world, right? Like we have, okay, so like esports is largely cognitive, though there are some physical elements to it, right? And you see a lot of athletes who retire due to like overuse or overstressed injuries and things like that, but it's largely cognitive. And on the other side, maybe on like, powerlifting or something, it's more like a purely physical kind of sport, though that is still being dictated by the brain. And so the brain dictates everything regardless of whether it's physical or cognitive, though. And you have to pay attention to your brain. I mean, it just controls everything. So I mean, just some potent examples for esports individuals. Your brain is undergoing major developmental changes until, some data suggests like late 20s, early 30s. And most of our esports population is somewhat younger, right? A lot of them are entering in the scene maybe when they're teens even, and potentially, early 20s and so on. And so your brain is undergoing major changes there. And you can kind of think about it like the quality of the built product dictates, the quality of the output a little bit, right? Like if your computer is made out of potatoes, it's probably not going to run very well. But if your computer is made out of, high quality parts, it's probably going to run a little bit more efficiently, right?
Yeah.
And the funny thing about this is like, it's cheesy, but like you literally are what you eat. Every single bit of you, your hair, your fingernails, your eyeballs, like your skin, your brain tissue, your muscle tissue, every single bit of you came from some bit of food that you ingested. That's the only way it could have happened. So like literally you are what you eat, and you can control what your brain is made out of. And if you are feeding it the right stuff, you can literally rebuild the architecture of your brain. And if that part wasn't enough, there are areas of the brain that are undergoing changes across the entire lifespan that we know now. So there's still reason to do it there. So we know that. And then we also know that the brain requires specific nutrients in the same way that other tissues do. So like, for example, in the physical world, it's very obvious to people. They're like, oh, I'm going to do a carb load before a marathon. And it's because we know the muscle tissue is going to rely on those carbs for fuel sources. In a similar way, your brain has specific fuels that it likes to use and to leverage. So if you feel fatigue at the end of the day, like mental fatigue, that's because you've tapped out of a lot of those resources. So you can do things to try to bolster those. And then there's also like the raw chemical reactions that occur in the brain. You can optimize a lot of the brain efficiencies that are going on. And then there's also a lot of negative things that impede brain function and efficiency too. So sometimes people are consuming things that are to the detriment. If you remove those, then, you can see an improvement. I mean, like, I'll just say like an obvious one, right? Like nobody gets smarter after drinking alcohol. So if someone is drinking, alcohol, and I'm not going to say, oh yeah, esports doesn't do this, but like I've definitely seen like some teams traveling and then they go wild after like a clutch win on the day one, and then all of a sudden day two they're, anyway. So those kind of things, like the removal of negatives can improve. You can also redo the architecture of the brain, and then you can also provide the raw fuel for the brain. So there's a lot of this, and we have all this data in parallel arenas. And we've been doing this for decades. It's just esports is behind, I would say. So like, you look in the tactical setting, right? Like they're doing specific nutrition stuff to enhance like choice reaction time, to minimize jet lag, to bolster like hand-eye coordination and like visual acuity and this kind of steam, and like the military, the police force, all this kind of stuff. In fact, they will use video games to train these people in the last like couple decades, like through like VR sets and things. So it's like we've been doing this, and there's also these strategies in other sports as well too. I mean, you look at a sport like baseball, you look at a sport like doesn't require you to be very physically fit at all. there was sorry, I'm just getting excited, so I
You're
can shut up
fine.
if you. But so there was actually a fun study where they were looking at different brains, and in research, it's really hard to find a control group for someone who is an elite esport athlete. So there's a discussion about this, like, what is your control group for this?
What do you mean by
Because
control group?
so in research, what you need is you always need you need like the intervention arm, and then you need a control group. And so what I mean by this is like if you have two groups of people, right, and you're like, okay, I want to see if this diet or this supplement is going to improve my reaction time. If you give it to someone who is like you, who's like a professional esport athlete, and it doesn't cause improvements, then we don't really know what's going on. We just say, okay, I gave you the supplement, maybe it did cause improvements, maybe it didn't. If we give it to Joe Schmo on the street and they're not a professional esport athlete, and maybe they have exactly average, like IQ and mental faculties and all this kind of stuff, and for them it does cause significant improvements, then we can make some theories about that. And so one thing that might like immediately come to my mind is, okay, well, a lot of esports athletes are kind of freakish, and you are closer to your ceiling, so there's less room to grow. So it's like your ability for reaction time is already higher than the average person in the population. So someone over here who's like a normie, they can take a supplement, maybe that'll boost their reaction time, but you can only go this much, and maybe it's not detectable on a
I
test.
think not everybody knows the term normie, but we've worked in the behavioral health, so we know what that is. Oh my gosh.
So anyway, it's like, how do you control for the esport brain, which might be a little bit freakish? And one lab, I believe in Japan, actually came up with the idea that you use a baseballer's brain. And this, I think, is really fascinating. And what you see is a lot of the same metrics that esports athletes are good at. Like when you do a cognitive battery on them, baseball players also seem to very similarly have almost identical scores on those things, which is really fascinating. So you can use a professional baseball athlete almost as a model for a professional esport brain. They have a lot of the same skill set and they overlap. But yeah, so I mean, anyway, just to get back to the point, I work with chess grandmasters and things, and we use strategies to enhance cognitive performance there. We use strategies to enhance baseball, brains and stuff. And it's all this stuff is already being done. And then in the esport world, for some reason, it's just I'm not going to look at that. I'm going to pretend like there's nothing here, and I'm just going to ignore it because I want to DoorDash every single one of my.
The DoorDash times. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just funny because we have just a wealth, literally thousands of years of data suggesting that you can use specific nutrition strategies to enhance cognitive performance. And it's just esports is new, right? And so they haven't had a chance yet to incorporate those things. And you had the luxury of working with, the 76ers. There's so much support staff that is set up around traditional sports that I truly believe needs to be one-to-one ported over to esports.
Hardly. At least not anymore with the esports scene right now.
Esports winter is hitting a lot of people for sure.
Yeah. And this is something that I've been saying from the beginning of time that I can remember, that traditional sports athletes have all of this backing, like you said, from multiple different people: a sports psychologist, a physiotherapist, dietitian, it goes on. But in esports, orgs aren't investing in it enough. They were trying to for a little bit, but I feel like they don't realize this is where they should invest their money in my opinion. And I
agree.
Yeah, and you were talking about science really does back what we're talking about. It really is researched and discovered. And you had mentioned how a team maybe would go drinking after winning. So on my team, when we would do 2-week boot camp, and this is for a world championship, this is right before we won 2 back-to-back world championships. On our 2-week boot camp, not to flaunt, we would make a rule. Yeah, we would make a rule of no drinking until we win. We had to earn that. And no heavy carbs. During this 2-week boot camp, we were very thoughtful of what we were eating. Mind you, one of my teammates loved In-N-Out, so we would have to go for her because she's Canadian every now and then. But the point is that I think that, do you think there's a nutritional strategy between maybe a 2-week boot camp? Because we would practice for about 10 hours, sometimes more a day. And that's a long time. So you have to be very thoughtful of what you're eating and your energy levels, right?
Yeah. And you mentioned a lot in there that could be expanded on for sure. And so it just depends on which direction you want to go. But in the idea of a boot camp, the purpose, so I like to, when I discuss with athletes, okay, so actually let me just say one quick sidebar and then I'll get to the main point of your question. Yeah, a lot of times I have to continually remind athletes, you know, if you take it all, I don't care if you drink, I don't care if you go wild, I don't care if you have like In-N-Out and all this kind of stuff, but yeah, I mean, just until then, you got to hold off, right? Because you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot. Yeah, I've seen really, really bad like horror stories with teams who were very well favored to win, and then like, you know, half the team is like throwing up all night, and then it's like they get no sleep, they come in dehydrated and all this kind of stuff, and then it's just like, yeah, performance stuff. So anyway, yeah, that's definitely. But okay, so the idea of a boot camp. When I work with teams, I like to differentiate two different scenarios, or potentially three different scenarios depending on the length of time with which I'm working with them. So one is the generic off-season time, one is a training day, and one is a competition day. And each of these has very different goals. And a lot of times what people try to, you know, distill it down into is like, just tell me what I need to do for anything. And I'm like, well, that actually doesn't work, because on a training day in a boot camp situation, your goal is to improve as much as possible. It doesn't matter if your performance was the worst it's ever been in your entire life. If you saw better improvements after that, then congrats, you successfully did what you were supposed to do at this boot camp, right? And yeah. I see a lot of people who get really tilted and all kind of stuff throughout boot camps and like training days and all this kind of, and it's like, it really doesn't matter how well you perform. All that matters is that you learn and that you get better on a training day and a boot camp scenario. On competition day, the goal is peak performance. You may not care necessarily about the adaptive response to that competition, unless it's like a multi-day competition, in which case, yeah, you want to learn and read your opponents and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, like on competition day, broad strokes, performance matters the most. On training days or boot camps, adaptations matter the most. And so to that end, there's a couple realities. One is, if your training day is 10 hours long, right, then there are some, and it's going to be going on for like 2 weeks at a time, kind of like what you listed. I can't do all of the same performance enhancing strategies that I would have you do on like a one-day competition, because it's going to be a contrary nutritional protocol, and it might actually on game days, as just like a blanket example, it might be a little bit lighter as from the calorie standpoint. Like there's some more restrictions on what you can have and what you cannot have. But if we were to do that across 2-week block, you probably wouldn't be eating enough to maintain your normal just like energy balance. So we can't do that. So anyway, so on a training day, there's learning that's occurring. And here's the really funny thing, because a lot of times people have this intuitive understanding in the gym that they don't have about mental things. So in the gym, and some people misunderstand this in the gym too. So like if I ask someone and I say, are you stronger or weaker at the very end of your gym session? So you just worked out for 1 hour. Are you stronger or weaker at minute 60? And a lot of times I get some answers like 50-50. Some people say stronger, some people say weaker. The answer is weaker, right? Like you are actually
okay, that's what I was going to answer.
was that what were you going to say, stronger?
Yes. No, I was going to say weaker.
Yeah.
Weaker.
Yeah. You're weaker, right? You're not stronger. And by the same token, if you do a cognitively exhausting task, you are not smarter at the end of that 60 minutes. Where the adaptive response happens is on the back end. And this is like a dirty secret in neuroscience. It's like learning doesn't occur during tasks, it occurs after tasks. So you need the stressor to prime the body to want to learn, to want to adapt, to want to get stronger, better, faster, whatever. But it's not until afterwards that actually happens, until that learning becomes a memory, until it gets consolidated into your brain, until the muscle has time to repair itself and like get better and stronger. So a lot of this learning occurs in the sleep time period, but it also just occurs in the generic like post window as well, depending on how long we're talking about here. So in a boot camp, a lot of the learning is occurring when they're sleeping afterwards. And so a lot of emphasis needs to be placed on that dinner meal or on that like pre-bed meal to really make sure that you're giving your brain all the nutrients it needs in order to facilitate that adaptive response. And so this one is kind of easy because if I just tell you and I ask you like, what's a healthy meal? And you can kind of answer that for me. I mean, if you want, like, what do you think a healthy meal is?
Well, for me, I've been paleo because of my IBS for the most
Yeah.
part. So a healthy meal would be a little bit of protein, double the veggie.
Okay.
I don't like processed foods, so everything I
Okay.
try to get from the ground. Am I
Yeah.
answering this right?
Yeah.
And some oils. I guess you need some fatties, so maybe some avocado or some olive oil on a salad or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, if you ask most people, I think most people have a good idea about what a healthy meal is. Like, if you ask in their true heart of hearts, they can point to something and say, oh, this is healthy or oh, this is not healthy, right? Like,
Yeah.
most people are not going to be like, yeah, I really think I'm representing the epitome of health when I go get a bucket of fried chicken at KFC and have a six pack of beer, right? Like, they know that that's not like the epitome of health.
Yeah.
And so really, and it's like super cheesy because I sound like my mom when I'm talking about this, but like at the end of a training day and before sleep, you do want to prioritize just a nice, well-balanced, healthful meal that has almost all of the nutrients. And a lot of times the sad thing is that this is the exact opposite of what a lot of teams do is they go to boot camps and then they go to In-N-Out at night because they're like, oh, I was tired, it's exhausting, let's go hang out, and then they go out and they be social,
It's
especially if
quick
the boot
and
camp is,
easy.
yeah, especially if they're traveling to a new location for the boot camp, right? Like they want to experience the local color, like all this kind of stuff. And so a lot of people do that. But yeah, you're right. You do want some protein. You do want some healthy fats in there. You do want some veg in there. You also do the one thing that I didn't hear in there was you definitely would want some kind of healthy starch of some kind. So
see, I can't eat carbs. I get so sick. I just stay away from my carbs. I don't know.
So we can talk offline, but I think for you and for what you mentioned beforehand, I think that it's more about choosing the right carbs than it is about carbs per se.
Yeah.
And there are some that are pretty universally well tolerated by the gut and by people. And I'm not saying you need to go wild with this, but that could enhance some things like energy level and also actually
I am
feed your
pretty
gut a
low
little bit.
energy lately. Yeah.
So just because I didn't really say it explicitly beforehand, the brain predominantly prefers two main fuel sources. The first is ATP, and the second is glucose. In fact, if you go on a ketogenic diet and you are fat adapted, for like 3 decades, the second you reintroduce like a piece of bread, your brain doesn't care that you're fat adapted. It's going to immediately still try to go for that bread. So no degree of a ketogenic diet will allow your brain to not want to preference those glucose molecules. And it's pretty severe to the point where the body is forced to undergo this process called gluconeogenesis, where it makes its own glucose from non-glucose substrates, so like from your fats and from your proteins, and it eats yourself in order to feed your brain the glucose it needs. And sometimes that can be detrimental to individuals because it means like a loss of lean tissue in order to like feed your brain, which literally means you ate yourself, you ate your body in a bad way to feed the brain. So anyway, yeah, sorry, I don't know if I'm answering the question or not, but yeah, so training days, you really want to prioritize that meal. Across the day, it's going to be more about the total daily energy balance. And it's also going to be a little bit about hitting all of like your micronutrient needs across the day. So like your vitamins and minerals and those kind of things. All of this is going to be facilitative of that adaptive response on the back end. Kind of whatever you can tolerate and stomach. The most obvious and challenging time point for maybe someone like yourself with gut issues would be what to eat during, especially if you're going to play right after, because you have to be mindful that if you eat too big of a meal, you get what's called like a postprandial dip, which a lot of people experience maybe like around Thanksgiving, not necessarily because of the tryptophan, but you just stuff yourself silly and then you want to go take a nap after. And part of what's going on there is there's the competition for the scarce resource, which is blood. So when you eat food, what happens is all of the blood in your body has to go around your intestines because it needs to facilitate that digestion at the expense of other parts of your body, like your brain. So you kind of just shut down, and we call it the rest and digest system. And if you eat a big meal, you divert a lot of blood down to your intestines. There's no door to close in your intestines and say, oh, I'm not going to eat right now, it's after 7 p.m. or whatever. But so your body's forced to divert that blood, and then performance can be lessened. So you have to be careful with that on a training day.
So,
And
so
yeah, sorry.
in,
Okay.
I know you're so passionate. I love it. I love it. And so am I, really. Like, you could go on for days about this. There's so much information, especially with what you do. It seems like you really had a lot of time in research, which I love, and I definitely want to chat with you more. But so in 2020, just to give everybody a little bit of my background, okay, because it's going to lead up to my question. In 2020, I got really, really sick. I was super bloated. I didn't want to eat, and I thought I had a gluten intolerance, and I went to many, many doctors who said, no, your blood's fine, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, I don't feel fine. And then finally one doctor was like, maybe you have IBS. And then so I was like, oh my gosh, what does that mean? So then I started seeing a nutritionist. And before this, I struggled a lot with anxiety. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. Is you have a lot of anxiety and you just don't know where to start. Sure, you can go see a therapist, which I also really recommend, and I did. But I didn't realize until I saw my nutritionist and changing the way that I'm eating, because I thought I was eating healthy, but really the healthy, I don't know if it's called green labeling or whatever, wasn't healthy for me. Everybody's different.
Right.
So once I changed my diet and I started taking certain supplements, one in particular is called Minchex from Simple Process. Um, I was so much more calmer, less stressed. It helped with my depression. Like, have you seen this before where people could change or is it just like a thing with me where something simple as changing your diet could help even with performance anxiety for a professional gamer?
Yeah, and this is a really powerful number that I want to give, and the number varies, but what they see is that people with gut issues are diagnosed with a comorbid psychiatric condition something like 60% of the time.
Oh.
So when the gut is malfunctioning, it seems like the brain is also malfunctioning. And
Hmm.
there's a lot of data now to show that there's a tremendous cross link between the brain and the gut. The gut is actually innervated completely independently by its own second nervous system. So much so that in like some textbooks you'll see that it's called like the second brain, because it just has its own little nervous system and it kind of functions over here. But there's a lot of crosstalk because you have these two different brains who are communicating with each other. And something, just to put some things in perspective, something like over 90% of the serotonin is made in the gut. And that's
Wow.
kind of like a powerful number where it's like, okay, so you better believe that that's having some impact on just like hormones and, general neurological functioning.
Hmm.
So we know that, and I don't mean to say like, I mean, yes, I do mean like diagnosed psychiatric condition, but I also mean more small scale things too, like just like, oh, performance anxiety and, these kind of things too.
Sure.
So, yeah, so there's a lot of crosstalk there between just the gut and the brain and how you're feeling, both from that level, which seems to be mediated by the gut microbiome, which makes all
Mm.
sorts of these interesting molecules that we use and leverage. And so the diet has a tremendous impact on gut microbiome diversity and also on the quantity and the quality of your gut microbiome. So you can directly impact your gut microbiome through your diet, and through gut microbiome alterations, you can impact your brain rather directly. And so we have this pretty pronounced and direct link that we're starting to see and starting to appreciate between the gut and between just brain health. And then we can take it a step further, which is like, okay, well, yeah, and then the nutrients also are like the raw energy that my brain needs. And we know that people feel down when they're like if you're devoid of certain like vitamins and minerals. Like there's also links between like
Right.
certain
Yeah.
amino acid deficiencies and like depression and anxiety and all these kind of crazy things. And
Hmm.
it's really powerful where it's like if you fix the diet, you can sometimes fix the brain as well. And that's not to say that that works for everybody, and there might be something deeper going on there. But
Yeah.
sometimes, and some people, it certainly wouldn't hurt to improve the diet or at least give it a shot to see if that also has some trickle down effects. So yeah, and for you in particular with like the IBS, I'm curious. Did they? Sounds like you went onto like a paleo-ish kind of diet. Are you Have you ever tried what's called like a low FODMAP diet? I'm just curious.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I hate saying that I'm on a paleo. I'm not on any diet. I just don't eat. I don't eat.
Processed foods?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
What do you call that? So I just say paleo.
Yeah,
But
I like
FODMAP
that.
I've done. Yeah, or
Okay,
I
yeah.
do.
Did that help at all with it or no?
Oh, definitely. Oh my gosh. Yes. Yeah.
That's usually the first go-to that we do, like in the hospital for like a clinical level thing is we'd say, okay, let's try low FODMAPs first for IBS, and then we might progress it down into like a full comprehensive elimination diet. And then like, it takes like a half a year, honestly, but then we like slowly reintroduce foods one at a time till we find the stuff that works for you. But yeah, so yeah, absolutely. Diet can have a very pronounced and powerful impact on just how you feel, your energy level,
mood,
all this kind of stuff.
The way I was playing, I mean, everything. I really want to emphasize this for anybody listening. It really helped me both in game and out. I'm just changing my diet, so I hope, Obviously, sometimes you need more. I'm a nurse. Sometimes you need medication too, but Yeah.
I mean, I'll also say, part of the issue too that I see in the world of esports is that the demographic slants a little bit younger, and the younger you are, the more forgiving your body is about the abuse that you give it. So if you're, I have a lot of kids, who'll be like hot stuff, and they come in and they're like, well, I got to where I am. I got to rank 1 on the ladder without caring at all about my diet. So why do I need to even talk to you?
That was me. Yep.
And that's kind of like a bad. I mean, there's so many logical flaws with that argument, but I mean, like one of the obvious ones is like, okay, well maybe you could have hit rank 1 faster if you had taken your diet or your mental or your exercise or whatever it is, like a little bit more seriously, right? You could be even, or maybe you could even be even better, like the gap between 1 and 2 could be like this instead of like this or something, so it's like that doesn't mean anything. It just means that cool, you're really talented, nice job, but it doesn't mean that diet didn't impact what you were doing. But it's true that there's a little bit more latitude the younger people are. So a lot of times when I'm working with the team, it's usually the vets who are a little bit more open to making some modifications and trying some things out. It seems that usually the younger individuals, unfortunately, tend to want like the quick fix. They're like, just tell me what supplement to take, tell me what pill to take, and I'll do it. And that I kind of don't like. And I'm starting to see like more maturity though out of esports over the last like decade, where previously it was very much so kind of what I outlined, where a lot of people just don't even care, turn their nose up at it. But now, but I would argue maybe in the last like few years, like there has been at least a slightly growing interest in health and wellness, especially when you see like players retiring like in their early 20s and citing like uncontrolled diabetes and obesity and all this kind of stuff. It's really sad. And I'm just like, why would type 2 diabetes used to be called adult onset diabetes, right? And it's like now it's like it's just type 2 because all these kids are getting it, and it's tragic. So I do think that, and I don't know if I said this earlier, but like I think health is a prerequisite for performance. So until we get the health of the individual dialed in, and have you seen a piece of broccoli in the last year? Or like, have you walked by one in a grocery store or something? Like it's some very basic stuff. Until that is done, then it becomes really challenging to implement more, fun, like performance enhancing strategies, because that's going to give you the highest return on your investment, is just like correcting for the basics. Really, like the pillars get you like 80% the way there, truly. And then it's like after that, then you can layer on these additional strategies to have some extra fun. And I can talk about whatever strategies you want to for game day or training day. I know I'm talking a lot, so I'm sorry.
So actually, no, that's let's talk about that actually, because I have a big tournament coming up, and actually right now during this weekend there's NA challengers for Valorant. So sometimes you have 3 games in one day. That's 3 BO3s, which could be 9 to 10 hours. Yeah. When you know that you have to prepare for that upcoming day for us competing, could you give us a quick piece of advice of how we should plan our nutrition for that day for peak performance?
Yeah. So This answer could be like hours long, literally, but I'm going to try to distill some of it. So I'm going to condense it. I'm literally going to condense it as best as I can. So what you see is that a lot of nutrition interventions do require sometimes like days, weeks, months before they actually become effective. So like if you're trying to redo the architecture of your brain in one day, it's not going to happen. You know, that's a process that takes a lot of time. The interventions that can show improvement in like a single day are like the more fuel-based stuff, like what is your brain actually using today? And some of the quickest things that you can do to, some of the quickest alterations that you can see in your body quite profoundly, the number one thing is hydration status. So hydration status can be adjusted in as little as 24 to 48 hours. But what this means is hydration for today started yesterday. So really, if you have a 3-day if you have like a day competition, you have to make sure that your hydration yesterday was on point. You can't just chug a gallon right before you go out on stage and then hope that it's going to go well. You're probably going to, well, that's a mistake for a lot of reasons, right? You're going to be in the bathroom, like you're going to be peeing your pants or something. So you have to start the day before. So you want to start the day before. And so hydration is probably the number one thing that you want to do. You want to make sure that you're a quick heuristic, which I kind of like, but you know, it breaks down in certain individuals, is just like half your body weight in fluid ounces. So if you weigh 200 pounds, drink at least 100 ounces, that kind of thing. This doesn't work for obese or really thin people. So it only works if you're kind of in like a sweet spot. Otherwise you want to use an adjusted body weight based off of how much roughly fat-free mass you have, which would be essentially like if you estimate your 20% body fat, then take 20% off of that number, kind of how that would work. The day before, you also want to be roughly eating healthy, nothing stupid. Don't, you know, if you're traveling, don't like go and you're lactose intolerant, don't have a pint of ice cream the night before, don't be out partying, like don't do all this kind of stuff. So, you know, like all that stuff, like don't be stupid. The other thing, which if you have the luxury of it, so if you have more time than just one day to prepare, ideally you would have adjusted your living schedule and your active schedule to be on the same time as your competition. So if you actually know when your competition is going to be, if you're, and it's just a one, like best of 3 or something, and you're like, oh, I know I'm competing at noon, then every single one, if you have the luxury, every single one of your training sessions should be at noon, because your brain will kind of reconfigure itself for optimal performance at that particular time point. So if you have the luxury of it, you should completely restructure your days leading up to it, so that way it aligns perfectly with what the actual schedule is. A lot of teams can't do this because they're at the mercy of, you know, when other teams can scrim and so on, so it makes it awkward.
And me, I have to work as a nurse in the morning and then late at night practice. Oh gosh. Okay.
So that's unfortunate for you. But what you can do also is, by the same token, you can try to adjust your feeding schedule to match what you know is going to be available there. So like hypothetically, if you're like, oh, my second best of 3 is at 2 and my first one ends at noon, you're probably going to want to try to keep eating between that 12 and 2 block, because you know that's when you're going to be eating on game day, right? And so your body can preemptively get used to eating at those times that you know are going to be feed windows on actual match day.
I love that.
So setting up that consistency. And so part of this is just trying to build out that consistency, because once your body knows what it's going to be doing, then it can preempt it and it can do it more efficiently. So if you're like, oh, I always eat at noon, then your body says, oh, I'm going to get the digestive juices going. I know food's coming at noon. Like my girl's got me. Like she's going to give me food at noon. So your body can preempt it, make it more efficient, and it will do that. So on game day, take whatever eating schedule you anticipate is going to happen there, and then try to do that in the days leading up. So that's the days leading up.
Okay.
On actual game day, so we're finally here. On actual game day, depending on when your first one is, there's this pre-game time window that I like to talk about, which is 0 to 4 hours before competition. So that's what I call the pre-game block. If it's more than 4 hours away, it's no longer the pre-game block. So this is just how I'm defining it. Depending on the time of this, you should try to eat a relatively full meal about 3 to 4 hours before competition. That's the ideal time. That's what I would personally recommend. So if you're competing at noon, then ideally you'd want to eat at like, 8 to 9-ish. If that's not possible, because first competition is like so early in the day that 3 to 4 hours before doesn't make sense, that's okay. It just means you can't eat a full meal anymore, and now you're going to be eating something smaller. So if when you eat your pregame meal, it is, say, 2 hours before, it's going to be the size of maybe half of a normal meal. So we're wanting to scale the size of the meal in relation to how much time you have to digest. So the further away, you can eat like a full, nice, healthy, balanced meal. It's 2 hours before, it's going to be a half a meal. If it's 1 hour before, you're probably looking at just like a large snack. If it's like 0 to 30 minutes before because you literally just rolled out of bed and you're just like winging it, then yeah, I hope that's not you, but then it's probably just like a tiny snack or maybe even nothing. So we scale the size of the meal, and then we also will be scaling the contents of the meal as well. So the two things that the body is really able to digest well are carbs and also are
my enemies.
and proteins. Fats are the hardest thing to digest, so you don't want to have a fatty meal. And part of what's going on here is on game day, stress tends to run very high. You tend to be a little bit more amped up. And I may not even mean that in like the sense that people are like, oh, I'm stressed out and I'm frazzled, all this. I mean, like physiologically, like you might have some adrenaline running through you, or, you know, it could be that kind of like game day, like performance anxiety, that kind of thing. Like, but usually stress levels in a physiological sense are higher on game day. And what this means is your body is much more in a fight or flight kind of response, and blood is being diverted away from the rest and digest system, which is, you know, eating foods. And what it does is it makes it increasingly more challenging to actually digest foods. And so if you give your body hard to digest foods, you're probably going to have some stomach issues. So a lot of people report like stomach cramps, and then, you know, a lot of people will naturally say, oh, I like to feel light on game day, so I skip my meals before I eat, right? Yeah. That's a very common thing.
I used to do that.
So what happens is people are, because they're experiencing this, because they're experiencing the stress, there's no blood there to digest. Most foods, well, very particular foods are hard to digest, but there are foods that are very easy to digest, and that's what we want to prioritize. So we want to prioritize these easy to digest foods to give you some nutrients that are not going to stress the gut, are pretty much unanimously, universally well tolerated. So simple carbs. This doesn't mean I endorse these all the time, but simple carbs, things like just like white rice, like literally just like white rice, white bread, this kind of stuff. Very simple stuff that is almost universally well tolerated by the human. And it's going to be scaled a little bit. So we prioritize some simple carbs. We also get a modest amount of lean protein, so like a chicken breast or something like that. And then we try to minimize both of fat and fiber, because both of those are two of the hardest to digest things. So unfortunately, having like a big salad right before is, you know, while it's healthy, it's actually a stressor on your stomach, and depending on how severe the stress is, you significantly increase your likelihood for some kind of GI issues. So you want to be very careful about. That's not to say that, like, you know, broccoli's bad for you. It just means you have to be very, very smart and careful about it, and probably really like tiny amounts if it's like really close to competition. So we're trying to get rid of these negative foods. Some classic, really good examples of like favorite pre-game meal options would just be like a simple sandwich. You know, you get your lean protein, you get your white bread. I know like some teams that would do potentially if you're light on the peanut butter, just because that's pretty fatty. But yeah, PB&J, I've seen teams do that. I used to work with the Clippers a little bit. Their favorite was sushi. And
what, before games?
Yeah, sushi before games.
Sign me up.
But if you think about it, this actually works for esports too, for the exact same reason, because it's a simple carb, and then it's the, you know, depending on the fish you get, it's like a leanish protein.
Yeah.
So so like a sushi would work, or maybe just like a grilled chicken pasta, you know, like plain marinara, not like a crazy cream sauce or anything like that. These are some good examples for like the pregame, or if you are in a breakfast like hotel situation, you know, like some oatmeal with maybe like half a scoop of protein powder, some eggs, some yogurt with some berries, like all these kind of things are like really good breakfast food options. If you're a caffeine drinker, usually you want to do a dose at like 30 to 60 minutes before. If your competition is going to last less than 4 hours, you would do like a full dose around there. And I can give you some numbers for dosages for caffeine. I know a lot of people do use caffeine. But if your competition is like a best of three situation, that's 10 days, you are a caffeine user, what you're going to actually have to do is you're going to have to space out your caffeine doses throughout the day so that we can get sustained attention rather than just this one like peak and valley kind of situation.
So interesting you brought that up, because my team's tradition would be to get Starbucks on competition days in the morning. So now
do they drink caffeine normally or no?
Well, we would go for the energy drinks. They would go for the energy drinks usually, which I think is too much caffeine sometimes. But yeah, so we would just do Starbucks. I think normally people would have caffeine. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, and so Starbucks beforehand is fine. The one catch that I would say about this actually is you see me, I've been sipping on my black coffee pretty much this entire morning.
I know you're gonna say.
So black coffee has a tendency to have some gut issues with people, so you want to be careful with that. A lot of times people use it to stimulate the bowels to move. So sometimes while it's actually healthy, so like I would prefer, if you can tolerate it, to do like a green tea or a coffee or something like that.
That's my thing, green tea. Yes.
Yeah. All that stuff is great. However, if you're one of the people who has a very sensitive stomach to the coffee, then it could be beneficial to go for a more artificial source of caffeine. And I usually don't endorse that, but that could be a unique situation where if someone has a problem with it. But what you're going to want to do, and so the funny thing though is, because I do see a lot of teams who have their like coffee cups on stage, right, and they're drinking their coffee and they're sipping on it. They're probably not doing themselves a service with that, because we're trying to leverage the caffeine for performance, right?
Right.
And so if you're just sipping on the caffeine, you're probably getting like, I don't know, like 2 mgs of caffeine per sip or something. That's like a micro dose of caffeine. That's not actually really doing much for you. Maybe it's giving you a little bit, but what we would actually want to see, if we're truly trying to use it for cognitive performance, is you have to have like a dose of caffeine. It's like, okay, boom, here's 50 mgs. Here you go. Like, and then it's kind of all in one sitting, so that way it has a chance to actually rise in your blood, and then your brain can feel it. If you're just like a tiny drip level, and you're like here, like your brain's never even going to notice that there's any caffeine in your system, really. So it's funny when I see teams doing that, because that's not the smart approach. But something that would make more sense is like, okay, so a standard cup of coffee has maybe 100 milligrams in it of caffeine, depending on what you're getting. And typically, if we have a very long day, so you mentioned like a 3x3 kind of situation, in that instance, what I would recommend is maybe anywhere from like 30 to 50 milligrams of caffeine every 4-ish hours or so. So what you would probably want to do is like, all right, I'm going to chug half of this cup of coffee and then wait 4 hours, and then chug the other half of the cup of coffee, wait another 4 hours, and then maybe if I need another one, then get another half a cup of coffee kind of thing. If you're sipping on it throughout, then your brain's not really going to feel it. You're probably going to get a little bit of a smidge of alertness and a smidge of that, like, oh, that smell, it's like this feeling of waking up. But if we're actually talking about improved cognitive metrics that are measurable on like a test, you have to give your body enough to notice it in one sitting. And so that sustained, slightly higher dose would be the move.
Wow, I'm writing down notes as you're talking, because this is so helpful for me, and I can only imagine somebody that's listening, because there's a lot of tournaments that are coming up. They're gonna need to know this information. So you're with 1HP. So if somebody wanted to ask you a question or get help with you directly with 1HP, what would that look like for them, and how could they get started?
Yeah, I mean, so 1HP actually has this, it depends on where they're at. Like, if it's just an individual, we have this thing called One Health Point, which is just like a subscription service for whether it's nutrition or whether it's fitness or, PT. And people can get like a free consult just to see if it's something that they're interested in. And nutrition is one of those service lines, and it's myself and another dietitian who are heading that up. So, but yeah, I love talking about this stuff. You can do that if you're interested in doing like some more serious work, or if you just want to talk, just like shoot me a message on Twitter. I'm notoriously bad at social media. Like I actually used to have my friends manage all of my social media accounts, and even now, like I'm not really on it. So I try to respond as quickly as I can. But yeah, people just want to say, hey, what's up, or talk nutrition, or carry my bronze baddie but out of bronze, then I'm always open for duos and things like that too. So yeah, hit me up on Twitter at Casey Thomas RD, or you can go to the 1HP website, and all the links will be there.
I love the idea of the membership because I feel like with all of wellness, it's not just a one-time thing. Here's your advice, the great advice that you gave, and then one time. I feel like it needs to be maintenance. We're always adjusting, things are always changing. So I like the idea of the membership with you.
Yeah, it's good, and I think that we have some data that it takes at least 10 weeks to build a new nutrition habit. At least.
There you go.
So a lot of times people will come to me and they're like, oh yeah, the only thing that worked for me in the past was diet X. And they're like, I've done it like 5 times. It's like, well, if you've done it 5 times, it hasn't worked, right? And so it's just like really funny that then people come to me for that. Yeah. But yeah, it's like, if you really want sustainable changes, then you have to do something for an extended duration to make it become a habit.
Yep.
And I find that one-offs usually don't get the job done. And I like having continuity of care because it gets them better results.
Yeah, I did a lot of diets when I was a little bit overweight, so I did a lot of those diets, and yeah, diets do not work. What made it really easy is that I get really sick now, so that's why I'm like, okay, it's not worth getting super sick and having an absolute terrible day. So really, really great advice from you. I feel like we could go on for hours. I love this chat, and I hope anybody that listening was. I have a question that I ask everybody that's on my show. So what does gaming and wellness mean to you?
I think it depends on the scale that we're talking about here. But for, an esport population, if we're talking about true athletics, I think that wellness and gaming is being able to carry out the activities and the training that you or your coaches want you to be able to do at the level that you want to be able to handle it. So if you're getting sick, if you're tired, if you're low energy, if you can't show up and give 100% every day like how your coaches want, then I don't think you have wellness. I think it's just being able to do the things that you want to do, that your coaches want you to do, that is, within reason, right? I mean, sometimes they put them through brutal training schedules and like 10-hour days and all this and that kind of stuff, right? That's probably unreasonable of an ask, but I think that wellness and gaming is simply just being able to do at full capacity what you want to do and what you're expected to be able to do in that. And I think that translates over to recreational gaming as well too, but yeah.
Love it. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Casey, for chatting with me today. I'm going to post at the bottom of the description all of the information for anybody who wants to reach out to you and get any help, just chat with you. And I just love this conversation. It's something I'm really passionate about. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, it was a blast, and sorry for my long-winded answers, but hopefully it was enjoyable to some people.
Loved it. Thank you. Have a good night.